I don't know who this girl was this month. I don't know her. And the second book changes everything. The format breakdown is where things get crazy. And I actually ended up reading everything she's ever written this month. Who am I? Who is this person? What have I done? January was insane. I read 30 books in January. That is almost a book a day. I have never read that many books in 1 month. I truly do not know how it happened. I have nothing to say for myself, but let's talk about them. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Sam. This is my January wrap up where we are going to talk about 30 books today, which is a lot. So grab yourself some coffee, maybe a snack. I have my water because I am anticipating that I will be talking for a while. I will do my best to keep this interesting. So we have 30 books to talk about, but before we get into those 30 books, we're going to talk about the statistics for the month of January because I really like stats and I keep a spreadsheet. So if you're not into that, I will have a little time thing in the description so you can skip over it if you would like, but let's talk about the stats for January. Y'all already know these stats are going to be insane. They're also going to be very different from normal. I don't know who this girl was this month. I don't know her. She was not me. I wish she would stick around. I hope she sticks around, but I do not know this person who was reading in January. I truly don't. I'm going to put the stats up here because I just find this month's stats super interesting. As I've already said, I did read 30 books in January. Technically, it's the 31st, and I have 2 more to finish, but I have less than 150 pages left in both of them, so I will be finishing both of those today, so I'm not worried about that. I did add them to the spreadsheet, but I haven't rated them yet, just in case I change my mind. I kind of probably already know what I'm going to rate them, but could change my mind by the end of the book. You never know. So the first statistic that I find the most exciting is the number of pages that I read this month. I have always kind of had a secret goal to read over 10,000 pages in a month. I didn't think I would ever get there, and guess what? We did. I read 10,140 pages this month. That is insane. That is so many pages. That is a lot of pages, and I might need to up my reading goal for the year, honestly. First, we have the average number of pages that I read per day coming in at 327. Not bad. Like I said, 30 books. That was almost a book a day. Pretty happy with that. The average number of pages per book that I read was 338, which is a little bit lower than normal. I definitely had more short books than usual this month, which is probably how my number got so high, but I still read over 10,000 pages. My most read genre surprised me, like, a lot. Most read genre was thriller, which it is always fantasy. Fantasy has always been my most read genre. Every single month since I started tracking books, it has always been fantasy. And this month it was not. It was thrillers by, like, a significant amount. And if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that last year I was really struggling with thrillers. I wasn't even sure if I liked the genre anymore, and I was starting to get really discouraged every time I picked one up. I think we can safely say that that has changed and thrillers are back on the menu. And I am still in the mood for thrillers, honestly. I still want to read more. For my star rating breakdown, this is going to be not 100% complete because I have not rated the 2 books that I'm in the middle of yet. But I am fairly confident that one of them will be a 5-star read and one of them will be like a 3 to 4-star read. So for the other 28 books that I read, I had 5 5-stars, 7 4-stars, 13 3-stars, and 3 2-stars. I did not have any 1-stars this month, which is good. Had a lot of 3-stars, which I do think has more to do with the changes in the way that I'm rating books this year, more so than like not reading good books. Like, I read a lot of really good books, and 3 stars is not a bad rating by any means. I still highly enjoyed a lot of those books. Next up, we have publication breakdown. So this is not a statistic that I am overly concerned about, but it is something that I find kind of interesting, so I do track it. And the way that this spreadsheet tracks it is based on year of publication, but it only keeps track of new releases, so books that were published this year, books that were published last year, and then anything published before that is considered backlist. So I had 0 new releases. I have not read any new releases yet in 2023, but it's only 1 month in, and I do have at least 2 planned for February, so that number will go up. Then I read 9 books that were published last year, which I do tend to read a lot of books that were published the year before. I read a lot of books published in 2021 last year, so it makes sense that I was reading a lot of books published in 2022 this year. And then I also had 21 backlist books. There were a lot of those. I wasn't really paying attention to the year that things were published. I don't generally pay much attention to that, so I think it's interesting, but I'm not overly concerned with that statistic, honestly. The format breakdown is where things get crazy, especially if you know me as a reader. Y'all are gonna be like, who is this person and what has she done with Sam? So I read 3 physical books this month. I know, like, what am I doing with my life? I also read 4 ebooks, so 7 books were like physically read by me, and then I read 23 audiobooks. 23 audiobooks. 23 audiobooks. Who am I? Who is this person? What have I done? How? That is more audiobooks than I have read in my entire life. Ever. 23 audiobooks in 1 month. And I have an explanation for this. I got really into puzzles this month. I have cracked the code for me and audiobooks. I cannot listen to audiobooks in the car because it distracts me from driving. I cannot listen to audiobooks while I am like doing chores or anything because then I'm not focusing on the book. I can't do anything that requires too much brain power. Doing a puzzle, however, somehow works perfectly with audiobooks for me. I have done like 12 puzzles this month, like 1,000-piece puzzles, and I have read 23 audiobooks. I don't know who this person is. I hope she sticks around. I am, however, on my last puzzle, so I don't know what happens when I run out of puzzles. But we will cross that bridge when we get there, and hopefully the audiobook thing keeps working because 30 books in 1 month is pretty impressive. I've also started tracking series and kind of keeping track of how many series I'm starting versus finishing. I've never really worried about that too much because I am more of a binge reader. I tend to read like entire series very quickly. But I do want to kind of start keeping track of it a little bit. So for January, I started 5 new series, continued 8, and some of those I continued series that I started in the same month. I completed 1 series, caught up with 4 series, and then I also read 11 standalones that weren't part of a series. So I think that's pretty good. Started 5, continued 8. I'm either caught up with or completed 5. So I finished or caught up with as many series as I started. So that's not bad at all. I also used my library way more than ever, which was one of my kind of unofficial goals for 2023, was to use the library more. So I got 1 book off of Audible. I have like a free trial and somehow I ended up with 2 credits. So I have 1 credit left, but I used 1 credit on Audible. 3 books were from Kindle Unlimited. 7 books were from the library. Hi, Editing Sam here. So I really wanted to preface some of this data because I realized while I was editing it that it's very, very skewed. The way that I tracked these books was if I owned the book, I counted it as owned, even if I borrowed it from the library to listen as an audiobook. If I own the physical book, I still counted it as a book that I own, and I didn't count it as a library book, even though I did borrow a book from the library. So I feel like this data is actually not as accurate as it should be. So I went and tried to calculate the actual number of books that I borrowed from the library, including books that I already own. That number actually ended up being 13. So technically I borrowed 13 books from the library, but out of those, only 7 of them were books that I don't own as well. And 7 of the books that I own, I got from the library. I only actually own like 3 of them. So there's that information for you because I feel like that data is a little bit more accurate. 10 books were books that I owned and 9 books were from Scribd. So I did pretty good with not buying books this month, which was good. I already owned 10 of them. Most of those were Christmas gifts. 9 of them were on Scribd, so a lot of books I wasn't paying for or were like part of a subscription or like a free trial. Genre breakdown, again, was kind of wild. Thrillers was definitely my highest at 19 books read. 19 thrillers, that is a lot of thrillers. Definitely my highest genre by far. I also read 5 fantasies, 1 fantasy romance, and 5 romance books. So not bad, not bad. Very different than normal, but I thoroughly enjoyed this month, so I'm not complaining. I do also like to keep track of the size of books that I'm reading because I do think that makes a difference. Like if I read 30 books in a month, but a lot of them are small books, versus reading 5 books in a month, but they were all like huge 1,000-page tomes. Like, I feel like that kind of evens out, you know? So the way I personally break this down is anything under 350 pages I consider a small book. Anything between 350 and 500 pages is a medium book. 500 to 700 pages is a large book, and then anything over 700 pages is a chunky book. So for January, I read 20 small books, so books under 350 pages. So that definitely helped me get more books read. I had 7 medium books and 3 large books. So I didn't read any chunky books this month, but that makes sense because I was reading a lot of smaller books. That's how we got to 30. That makes sense. Those are my stats for January. They were wild. Now let's jump into the 30 books that I read. I needed a change of scenery, so we have moved to a different chair, but I'm going to start with the books that I physically own on my shelves. Some of these I did still read as an audiobook or an ebook, but these are the ones I can physically hold up and show you, so I'm going to start with that. And we are going to start with Legendborn and Bloodmarked. These are young adult fantasies, dark academia. We are following our main character Bree after the death of her mother, and so she is grieving and also starting early college at UNC Chapel Hill. And she ends up involved in the secret society that has like King Arthur vibes, and there's also some other things happening. There's a lot of like ancestry going on here. It's very, very good. And the second book changes everything. The second book changes everything. I don't know how I am supposed to wait until the third book. I am probably going to die. It took like 2 years for us to get Bloodmarked. I don't know how I'm gonna wait another 2 years for the next book, because I mean, the first book was good, but the second book was great. I also did listen to both of those as audiobooks, and I would highly recommend the audiobooks for these. I thoroughly enjoyed them. I definitely forgot to tell you the ratings for those. Legendborn was a 4-star, Bloodmarked was a 5-star. Next up, I read A Light in the Flame by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the second book in the Flesh and Fire series, which is kind of like a prequel series to Blood and Ash. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I cannot get enough of her writing. I cannot get enough of these two series, these characters. I just... I did tab this book. This is the only series that I've ever, like, tabbed before, and I'm loving it. And I cannot wait for the third book. I don't know how I'm supposed to wait for the third book. If you want the slowest slow burn possible, if you like Blood and Ash, you're gonna like this. You might even like the love interest in this one better than the love interest in Blood and Ash. This was obviously a 5-star read for me. No questions. I don't know how I'm supposed to wait for the next one. Next up, I read The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is an adult fantasy set in kind of an apocalyptic fantasy world where they get 5th seasons every so often, which is basically just like a natural disaster that like destroys the world every few hundred years, I guess. It's very interesting. It is very, very, very dark. We are following 3 different characters, but the main character that we are following is a woman who comes home to find that her husband has murdered their 3-year-old son and run off with their daughter. So she is going across this broken world on her own to find her daughter. We also have magic, and we have like this, it's a very like very dangerous magic that's not supposed to be used. People are very scared of this magic. We have a lot of like apocalyptic things. It almost reads like a sci-fi, but it is a fantasy. But it's like a fantasy with sci-fi elements. And I cannot wait to read the second book. The end of this first book was so good, and I am just so excited to continue on with this series. I have never read anything like it, and I just absolutely loved it. This was also a 5-star book. Next up, I got caught up on Monstrous. I read Volume 7 and absolutely loved it. It was the first book I read in the month, so do I remember anything that happened? Not really, if we're being honest, but this is an adult fantasy graphic novel series. It is very dark, very gory. We are following a girl who has a very dark magic inside of her, and like monsters and different species. We have like humans, and the Arcanics are like humanoid animals, and then we have like the crossbreed between the two, and there's like cats is its own thing. Like it's crazy, it's complicated, it is very weird, but it is so good. I loved this one. This one was 4 stars for me. I feel like the whole series has gone between 3 and 5 stars depending on the volume, and I really, really, really want the next book to come out because I just really want to know what happens next. I need closure, and I did not get it with this book. Next up, I read Hairpin Bridge, which y'all know has been on my TBR for a very, very, very long time, and I finally read it almost a little slightly over a year after I bought it, if that tells you anything. This is by Taylor Adams, and we are following Lena, and basically her twin sister committed suicide years ago, but she doesn't really believe that that's what happened. She supposedly drove to this bridge and then jumped off and fell 200 feet. Lena does not believe that, so she goes to the scene of the crime. She's supposed to be meeting the police officer that found her sister's body, and kind of getting to the bottom, finding the truth, because she doesn't believe that that's what happened. Then it kind of turns into, like, her trying to survive on her own, figuring out what happened to her sister, all of the things. I gave this book 2 stars, and it was the second book I read this month, so, like, the details are very fuzzy, especially since I read so many thrillers. This was a thriller, and all of the thrillers are starting to blur in my head, but this one was okay. I wasn't amazed by it. I mean, there were some interesting twists, but it really wasn't anything that I was overly excited about, and I just felt like it dragged on a little bit too long. Like, it's not even that long of a book, but I just felt like the twists happened too early, and then it was more survival, less, like, more thriller, less mystery, and I tend to like the mystery to last a little bit longer, personally. So, I mean, it's not a bad book by any means. There are definitely twists. It does all the things a thriller should do, and it does them fairly well. I just wish the mystery had lasted a little bit longer, because there were just too many things. Like, the last 100 pages or so, it was like, okay, you already know everything. Now it's just, like, fight for survival. And, like, it was okay. It just wasn't what I wanted, you know? Next up, we have The Last Legacy. This is by Adrienne Young, and this follows Bryn, and she is a Roth. Basically, her family, it's almost like a gang. Like, it reminds me of Peaky Blinders type of thing. And she was raised by, I think, her aunt away from the family, and the deal was that when she turned 18, I think, she would be brought back to the family and, like, given a job and would be part of the family again and do all the things. She also ends up meeting another member of the family, but not really, like, not a blood-related member, but, like, part of this family gang type of thing. And there's, like, a forbidden romance happening there, and it kind of goes from there. It has, like, fantasy vibes without really being a fantasy. Like, there's no magic or anything, but it just reminds me of a fantasy, but, like, it's not really. I did enjoy it. I gave it 3 stars. I wish the romance was a little bit more slow burn. It was pretty, it wasn't insta-love, but it was pretty close. And I just wished that, like, we had gotten to know the characters a little bit more before the relationship part, but it's not a very long book, so, like, I get it, like, things can only happen so slowly when the book is only, like, 300 pages, so. It was good. I did enjoy it. I do really like this author in general, and I would probably read more. This is also set in the same world as her other book, Fable. I think we actually meet these characters in one of the Fable books, so then this is their story or whatever, and I did like it, and I really liked the guy, like, a lot. I just wish the romance had been a little bit more slow burn, or just a little bit more. That's all I wanted. A little bit more. Next up, I read Until the End by Abby Glines. This was a pick for my TBR, which was the highest rated book on my Goodreads physical TBR, which kind of surprised me that this was the highest rated book on my physical TBR at the moment, but it was. It's actually, the story is only, like, half of this book, and then you get into the epilogue for the entire Seabreeze series, which I didn't read. I only read, like, the actual story. Haven't read the epilogue part yet, because it's, like, multiple epilogues for the whole series, but basically this book is following Trisha, and she is coming from an abusive household, and then we also have Rock, who is, like, a major football star. He has a huge crush on her. He would choose her over football every time, but, you know, his dad and his football coach do not like that. It feels very, like, you know that Carrie Underwood song? The one, you know the one I'm talking about, with the football star and the, All American Girl, that one. It reminds me of that, except add abuse. So, maybe not. Like, kind of a little bit. But that's kind of the vibe we're getting. This is the last book in the Seabreeze series, though, and I have not read the whole series. It's one of those romance series where they're kind of like companion novels. You can read them out of order if you really want to. But then, since the second half of, like, this book was all the epilogues from the other stories, like, I feel the need to go back and reread all of the books. I've read 3 of them. The first one, the last one, and then one of the ones in the middle. So I have been slowly collecting the rest of the books so that I can actually read the whole series and then read the epilogues. But I gave this one 3 stars. I did really like it. It was very, very short. It was definitely the shortest of all the books because half of this book is just the epilogues. But I thought it was a really cute story and I really liked the romance. So, not a bad read. And then the last book that I physically own is All Roads Lead Here. I'm actually finishing this one today. Have not quite finished it. I have a feeling it's going to be a 5-star read. In this book, we are following Aurora, and she has just had like a breakup, and she is going back to the town where she grew up with her mother, where her mother disappeared while hiking, and she is staying in this garage apartment owned by Rhodes. And he is this like really grumpy, really surly, former Navy guy who is now a game warden, and he has a teenage son, and he does not like her. He doesn't want her staying in the apartment. He doesn't like people, and she is just so bubbly and so much fun, and y'all know where it's going from here. And if you want a slow burn, you got it, because I am well over halfway, and I am still waiting for what we're all waiting for. Still waiting. I'm also annotating this book. This is the first book that I have ever truly 100% annotated. Like, I have tabbed the Blood and Ash series, but I'm like actually like writing in this one and highlighting, and I have a full vlog coming for that. So if you're interested in that, that is coming up soon, because I am absolutely loving this book. I've always wanted to annotate a book, and I think this was the perfect book to start with. We're changing scenery again, trying to keep things interesting for both me and y'all. So we're going to talk about the ebooks and audiobooks that I read that I don't own. And there are a lot of them, and I will do my best to put them all up on the screen. So let's jump in. First up, we had The Groom Went Missing. This is by Jennifer Ruff, and it is the 5th book in her Agent Victoria Heslin series, which is like a detective series. All of the books follow a different mystery, but the same detective. And in this book, Victoria is going to a wedding. She is a guest of the best man, and the groom doesn't show up. And she doesn't think anything's wrong, but everybody else is adamant that something must have happened to him, that there is no way he wouldn't show up to this wedding. So it turns into this big mystery of what happened to the groom, what secrets are coming out of the family, and it's like this whole thing, and I promise you will not guess any of it. I gave this book 3 stars. This is one of my favorite thriller series. I just really like the overarching story of Agent Victoria Heslin and like her life as we go through each book. So the next book that I read was Vanished on Vacation, which is the 6th book in that series. In this book, we are still following Agent Victoria Heslin, and she has been sent to some resort in Mexico where a college girl, sorority girl, has gone missing. She tested positive for COVID and couldn't leave after spring break, so she wasn't allowed to leave, but then nobody knows where she has gone since then. Like, she disappeared, she never came home, her friends left her there, and it's like this whole thing. And she's also like the niece of somebody very high up in the FBI. So, high priority case. I really enjoyed this one. I gave this one 5 stars, actually. I thoroughly enjoyed the story to this one. I felt like the last one wasn't really all that good until the reveal, and then the reveal was good, so I gave it 3 stars. This one kept me on my toes the whole book. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Then I was looking for a new thriller author because I had read that, like, I had gotten caught up on Jennifer Ruff's series. There was one other series by her, but the first book wasn't on script and I didn't want to pay for it. So I started looking for authors that were similar, and I discovered Audrey J. Cole. And I really, really like her writing, and I actually ended up reading everything she's ever written this month. But we started out with The Recipient, and The Recipient is Emerald City #1. So the Emerald City is like the place, the location. It is the detective police force that is working on all of these cases. Very similar to Agent Victoria Heslin's series, where you're following different mysteries with the same detectives. This one has like multiple detectives, but same people, same area, different mysteries. The first book, The Recipient, is following these detectives as they are trying to solve these copycat murders. They had a serial killer who was on death row and actually died a year prior, and he committed these murders that were very, like, he had like his calling card, and they had never released that information to the public, so they were very curious as to how the new murderer was copying those particular details. We also have the point of view of a wife whose husband received a new brain, part of his brain was transplanted from said serial killer on death row, and she's afraid that he might be killing people now. It's a whole thing. I really liked the dual points of view of this. I really liked how we got to see different points of view from not just the detectives in this book, and all of her books are like that so far, so I have been really enjoying that. I gave this one 3 stars. It wasn't like my favorite thriller ever, but I thought it was a very solid thriller. I still enjoyed it. Then I read the second book in that series, which is Inspired by Murder, and in this one we are still following those same detectives, but we are also following a writer who is trying to write this murder mystery thriller book, but he can't get the details right, so he decides to commit murder himself so that he can write this book. So we are both following the killer and the detectives as they are trying to solve these murders, because he starts getting himself in trouble. It's part of him like planning this murder. He's not very good at it. He's also a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and like it's this whole thing. I really, really liked this one. I gave this one 3 stars as well. I just thought that the dual points of view were super interesting. I really enjoyed getting like the killer's point of view and like his thought process as he's like committing these murders to write this book. It was very interesting. If you want a book about a murderer who is really not the brightest, this one was pretty good. Then I read The Summer Nanny, which is the 3rd book in the series. It's really more of a novella. We're following a nanny who is babysitting this like infant, and then somebody breaks in, and basically we're getting a slasher from there. It was pretty good. It definitely was set up for the next book in the series. We get a lot of character development in the next couple of books, and there were a few events in this book that were very necessary for the next book. I gave this one 3 stars as well. It was solid, nothing overly special, but I did enjoy it. Then I read the 4th book in the series, which is Viable Hostage, and I'm not gonna lie, I remember nothing. Nothing. I just read the description of it. So basically we have a med student whose roommate goes missing, but she's like done the whole disappearing act with like drugs and alcohol before, so nobody really believes that she's truly missing. They think she's just on drugs somewhere. So nobody's really looking for her. And it goes from there, but I remember very little. Very little. There is like the body of another woman, it washes up, like a pregnant woman washes up, like brutally murdered. And then it does go from there, but I don't remember this book at all. I gave it 3 stars, but I don't remember reading it at all. So I guess it didn't really stick out to me all that much. Or it could just be because I read the entire series in like 2 days. Then I read the 5th and last book in this series, and this follows one of our other detectives, and she ends up undercover with this cult, and trying to basically stop the cult kind of thing, but like being in a cult isn't illegal, so she has to find something illegal that they're doing, and they're all pretty sure that something illegal is happening there. And that's kind of it. It's basically like undercover culty type of thing. It was pretty good. I gave this one 3 stars as well. I feel like the whole series was like a 3-star series. It was good. I don't know that I'll ever reread it, but like I enjoyed while I was reading it. This is another one where I don't really, the details are very fuzzy, but I really think that's because I read all 5 books in like the span of 2 days. So there's that. Next up, I read The Final Hunt. This is also by Audrey J. Cole. We are following our main character, Cameron, and her husband was killed in a bear attack in Alaska a while ago, and she is still very much grieving, and then she finds the photos. And the photos are pictures of women who have been murdered, and it turns out that her husband was a serial killer. And she no longer believes that he is dead. She thinks that he faked his death. She loses everything. Once people find out that she's the wife of a serial killer, she loses her job, she loses her lifestyle, nobody, like she's losing all of her money. Like it is not good for her. So she goes to Alaska in search of her husband, basically for revenge. It was pretty good. I enjoyed it. I gave this one 3 stars. I really liked the concept of this one. And there are definitely still, like, it was still twisty. It was still interesting, even though you know a lot of things going in. Like, who's the killer is not the secret here, but there are definitely still secrets, and I did enjoy it. Then I read the last Audrey J. Cole book, and this is The Pilot's Daughter. This book follows Cora, and she has not been on a plane since her husband died in a helicopter crash a while ago, but she has to get on a plane for something. I don't remember why, but she has to get on this plane, and while she's on the plane is hijacked. It's a pretty straightforward hijacked plane thriller. Like, there's definitely mysteries and stuff in there. If you like survival-esque books, like if you like anything survival-y, this has like every type of survival you could ever possibly imagine in it, and it's kind of cool. I did really enjoy it. I gave this one 3 stars as well. I really liked the thriller aspects of this, kind of like the survival aspects. I thought it was really fun. There were definitely some twists that I did not see coming, and it was pretty interesting. Next up, I read Survive the Night by Riley Sager. This basically, in like one sentence, follows a girl who gets in a car and is driving on a road trip with a serial killer. She thinks. So basically the whole book is her trying to figure out if he's the serial killer that she thinks he is and trying to stay alive. Yes, I gave this one 3 stars as well. I felt like it dragged on a little bit, but it was still really interesting. The ending was kind of like, are you serious? Like, that's the ending we're gonna go with? But it wasn't a bad ending by any means. It was just like, are you sure? Granted, I would probably make the same choice, so I can't fault her for that at all. Cannot fault the main character for the choices she made. I can't promise I wouldn't do the same thing. Next up, I read Only Wrong Once. This is also by Jennifer Ruff. It is her like FBI and CDC medical thriller series. It's the first book. This is the one that I got on Audible with my free trial, and I thought I was gonna love it and want to read the rest of the series, but I ended up giving it 2 stars. Basically, this is a pretty straightforward, like, outbreak, weaponized weaponized pandemic? Weaponized... I mean, I guess weaponized virus. Terrorism, weaponized, like, bioweapons, that kind of thing. It's very straightforward. Like, that is what the book is. It was interesting, but it dragged on a lot. Like, this book was way longer than it needed to be, and it wasn't even all that long. And I just didn't like it as much as I liked her other series, so I'm not sure that I'll continue this series, but I did at least read the first book. Then I read The Resting Place. This is by Camilla Sten, and we are following our main character, Eleanor. I read so many books, names are just like not happening. Eleanor, and she has that face blindness thing. I don't remember what it's called, but she doesn't recognize faces like at all, even people that she knows. So when her grandmother is murdered and she is going to see her grandmother, she comes face to face with the killer, but she can't pick them out from a lineup. She can't tell you who, she can't describe them. She has no idea who the killer was. But when her grandmother died, she left her this house that she hadn't been to in years. And so she and her aunt and a lawyer go to the house to like catalog everything and figure out what they're going to do with it. But there's definitely a lot of secrets in the house. They don't think they're alone in the house. There's a snowstorm, so they can't leave the house. It turns into this whole thing from there. It was really, really good. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was so interesting. I thought the face blindness aspect really gave like an extra level to kind of like the terrifying aspect of this thriller. I thought this one was solid. Then I read The Shadow House. This is by Anna Downs, and we are following our main character, Alex, and she is a single mother of 2, and she brings her children to this, I don't remember what you call it. It's like a rural community, but like a commune kind of thing. So basically there's like this expanse of land that the community owns, and you like go in on part of the land with some other community members and like share things and all of that stuff. So she ends up there. However, there's some really suspicious things happening. There's this creepy old farmhouse that nobody goes in, and we also have the point of view of the people who used to live in that house before the community was there, and what happened to them and what happened there that was not good. And some of those same things are now happening to Alex and her family, and it goes from there. I gave this book 3 stars. I thought it was really good. There were some things that I wished, like some directions I wished it had gone in that it didn't so much, but I still thought it was enjoyable. I still thought it was really interesting. A little bit confusing with the dual points of view for a second there. I got really confused on the timeline of things, but I still thought it was pretty good. Then I completely went off the deep end and decided to read the next Ice Planet Barbarians book, because why not? So I read book 5, which is Barbarian's Prize. Y'all know the concept by now. Each book follows a different girl with a different alien, and it is what it is. So yeah, I actually didn't like the 5th one. I gave that one 2 stars. It was, I didn't think the plot was interesting enough. Like, I understood, like, this one was very character driven, and like that's fine and all, but I was bored for most of it and just wanted it to end. So that one was not my favorite. It got better from there. So next up, I read The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. I don't remember what this one's about at all. Oh, this is the summer camp one. Okay, so 15 years ago, a summer camp person, Emma, watched as all of her like camp mates in her cabin like left the cabin, and they never came back. And they have never been found ever since. And now it is 15 years later, and she's going back to the camp as a teacher because she is an artist, and bad things start happening again. That's basically where we're going. Missing girls, camp, summer camp vibes. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I gave this one 4 stars. I really liked the direction that this one went in, and I thought it was super fun. And I really wish that I could tell y'all more about all these books and like give like lengthy descriptions, but like we got 30 books to go. Like, we have 30 books to talk about. I'm just trying to get through this. So then I also read Final Girls by Riley Sager. This one is following our main character, who was like, basically Final Girls are the girls that survive after a slasher film, basically, but in real life. So our main character in this book is Quincy, and she went on vacation with 5 of her friends to like a cabin, and all of them died except for her in the slasher, but she can't remember anything from that night. Absolutely nothing. But she is one of the final girls. There are 2 other women who have been in similar circumstances, and the media calls them the final girls. One of the final girls is then killed, and the other final girl comes to meet Quincy, even though they've never met before, but something is not right, something is very suspicious, and suddenly Quincy may be fighting for her life once again. I really enjoyed this one, thought it was solid, it was really great, I thought it was a lot of fun. I love Riley Sager's writing. Like, I feel like his books are very hit or miss for me. Sometimes I love them, sometimes I hate them. This was one of the ones that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I gave this one 4 stars. Then I read the 6th Ice Planet Barbarians book, because why not? And I gave this one 4 stars. Thoroughly enjoyed this one. This is definitely more of like an enemies to lovers situation, and I loved that. Plus, this one had really good setup for the next books. Like, I was kind of hitting this point in the series where I was like, okay, well, I don't know how are we going to keep this series going? Like, there are like 21 books in the series. How are we going to keep going from here? We're running out of girls. This one definitely set up to continue in like a really nice way. Then I read Girl Forgotten, which is by Karen Slaughter, and I gave this one 3 stars. And honestly, I might have rated it higher if I had realized that it was the 2nd book in a series before I read it, but I did not. But I think it's more of a like detective situation. Like, I'm pretty sure you can read this as a standalone. You just won't really know the backstory of the main character. But it's a story on its own. So basically, years ago, this girl was found dead, Emily. She was pregnant. She was like 17. And nobody ever found out who killed her. And then we also have our main character is Andrea, and she is a marshal, and she is both protecting the judge, who is Emily's mother, and also trying to solve Emily's murder kind of behind the scenes. It gets a little bit more complicated from that, but I don't want to say too much in case some of this stuff, like, I don't want to ruin the 1st book. I want to go back and read the 1st book now, because I'm not sure how much of... I don't want to say anything about Andrea in case it gives away stuff from the 1st book. I wish I had known that it was a series, but I didn't, so... But I do really like Karen Slaughter's writing. It is very dark and graphic. It's kind of like the difference between like CSI versus Criminal Minds. You know how like Criminal Minds is a little bit darker, a little bit more graphic than like the typical CSI show. Karen Slaughter's books are more on like Criminal Minds level. Like they're dark. There's a lot of really, really bad things that happen, and it can be kind of gruesome and kind of graphic. So there's like a lot of trigger warnings in her books. And this book actually made me really angry in the treatment of Emily specifically, because you get her point of view too. Like, I guess it makes sense for the times, but also I just wanted to like slap multiple people. So there's that. We're almost done, I promise. Then I listened to Pretty Girls, also by Karen Slaughter, and this one follows two sisters. So 20 years ago, one of their sisters, there was 3 sisters, and one of the sisters went missing and she was never found. And now it is 20 years later and another girl has disappeared, and one of the sisters' husbands was like murdered right in front of her, and it doesn't seem like those two things should be connected, but somehow they are, and it opens up this whole can of worms. Things get very dark and twisty from there. Every trigger warning in the book for this book, pick a trigger warning, it's probably in there. So heads up on that. Very dark, very gruesome, honestly, just very dark, very dark. But I did thoroughly enjoy it. I gave this one 4 stars. I thought this one was very fun. Okay, then I read Rock, Paper, Scissors. This one I gave 5 stars. This was so much fun. This is by Alice Feeney, and we are following a couple who are going to Scotland as kind of like a last-ditch effort to save their marriage, spend some time alone, and the wife says that she won this stay at this like Airbnb type situation, but she won it so they didn't have to pay for it. But once they get there, things are very strange. They're both keeping secrets. They might not both be getting out of this alive, and there's a lot of sinister things happening. And funnily enough, the husband in this book also has face blindness. This was the second book. I've only ever read 2 books that dealt with face blindness, and both of them happened in January, and that was not on purpose. But I really, really liked this one. I thought it was so twisty. I thought it was so interesting. I thought the face blindness really added things to this book. And I really like Alice Feeney as an author in general, so I cannot wait to read more of her books. And then last up is the other book that I am still kind of in the middle of. I'm like 70% of the way through. It's like almost done, but I am reading the, I think 8th book of Ice Planet Barbarians. I think 7th. I am enjoying this one too. I think this one's going to be a 4-star, probably 3 or 4. I think it's going to be closer to 4-star. I'm enjoying this one. I will probably read the next one. I will probably read all 21 at some point. I don't know that I'm going to continue all of them right now, but I got to do so much mood reading in January, and it was so nice. That was a lot. That was a lot. This is going to be a nightmare to edit, but those were the 30 books that I read in January. All in all, I am incredibly impressed with January as a month. I don't know if I hope February is the same or not, honestly. Like, on one hand, I do because this was incredible, but on the other hand, I don't, because if it's not, it probably means I finally got a job, which would be great. So we're gonna see how February goes. I'm kind of hoping I get a few more physical books in there, maybe a few less audiobooks, but we'll see. We'll see. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far in the video, you must really like my videos, so you should probably hit the subscribe button. And the little bell icon will notify you when I post. And the like button actually does help this channel. Like, it actually helps. It doesn't just make me feel good. It actually helps me. So that would be much appreciated if you could hit that button as well. And I will see y'all on Sunday very soon. Probably with my annotation vlog, I'm thinking maybe. We'll see. I will see y'all then. Bye.